It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky is a blanket of gray and the raindrops tap a soothing rhythm against the window pane. Perfect for baking. I decided to make a giant cookie, not just any cookie, mind you. This was going to be a cookie that would make even the most seasoned bakers envious. A cookie that would be remembered for generations. This cookie would be legendary. I could already feel the excitement bubbling up inside me as I gathered my ingredients. Flour, sugar, butter, eggs, and of course, an abundance of chocolate chips. I carefully measured each ingredient, making sure everything was just right. The flour was sifted to perfection, the butter was at the ideal room temperature, and the chocolate chips were plentiful. I mixed everything together, watching as the dough came to life in the bowl. As I shaped the dough into a giant cookie, I could already picture the final product. Golden brown, with gooey chocolate chips melting in every bite, and a sprinkle of sea salt to bring out the flavors. My mouth watered at the thought. This was going to be epic. I placed the cookie in the oven and set the timer. As it baked, the aroma filled the kitchen, wrapping me in a warm, comforting embrace. I couldn't wait to taste it. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever as I watched the timer count down. Each second brought me closer to cookie perfection. I imagined the look on my friends' faces when they saw the giant cookie. They would be amazed. I set the table, preparing for the moment when I would unveil my masterpiece. Plates and glasses were arranged neatly, and I even added a few decorative touches to make the presentation extra special. Finally, the timer beeped, and I opened the oven door. There it was, my giant cookie, perfectly golden brown and smelling absolutely divine. I carefully removed it from the oven and let it cool on a rack. Once it had cooled just enough, I cut the cookie into generous slices, each one oozing with melted chocolate chips. I served the slices on plates, adding a final sprinkle of sea salt for that extra touch of flavor. My friends arrived, their faces lighting up with excitement as they saw the giant cookie. We gathered around the table, and I watched with pride as they took their first bites. The cookie was everything I had hoped for, and more. It was soft and chewy, with just the right amount of sweetness. The chocolate chips were gooey and delicious, and the sea salt added a perfect balance of flavors. As we enjoyed the cookie together, I realized that it wasn't just about the baking. It was about the joy of sharing something special with the people I cared about. This giant cookie had brought us all together, and that was the true magic of baking. By the end of the afternoon, the cookie was gone, and all that was left were a few crumbs and a lot of happy memories. It had been a perfect rainy Saturday, filled with laughter, delicious treats, and the warmth of friendship. As I looked out the window at the rain still falling, I felt a sense of contentment. I had set out to make a legendary cookie, and in the process, I had created something even more special, a day to remember. I closed my recipe book with a smile, already thinking about the next baking adventure. Who knew what delicious creations awaited? But one thing was certain, the giant cookie dream had come true, and it was just the beginning. With the kitchen cleaned up and the last of the crumbs swept away, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Baking had always been a passion of mine, and today had reminded me why. It was about more than just the end result. It was about the journey, the creativity, and the joy of sharing. I placed the lid on the cookie jar, knowing that it would soon be filled with more delicious treats. The giant cookie had set a high bar, but I was ready for the challenge. After all, every great baker knows that the best is yet to come. As I took one last look out the window, I felt a sense of peace. The rain continued to fall, but inside my heart was warm and full. The giant cookie dream had been a success, and I couldn't wait to see what other dreams I could bake into reality. First, the ingredients. The foundation of any great recipe, the building blocks of culinary magic. I laid them out meticulously on the countertop, each one a crucial player in the symphony of flavors I was about to create. Flour, sugar, eggs, butter, baking powder, vanilla extract, and a pinch of salt. Each ingredient had its own role, its own purpose, and together, they would create something extraordinary. I grabbed my trusty measuring cups and spoons, tools of precision in the art of baking. These were not just ordinary utensils. They were my allies in the quest for the perfect bake. Each cup and spoon had been with me through countless recipes, each one a testament to my journey as a home baker. The metal gleamed under the kitchen lights, a promise of accuracy and consistency. I carefully measured the flour, ensuring each scoop was level and precise. Flour, the backbone of any baked good, needed to be measured with care. Too much, and the dough would be dense and heavy. Too little, and it would be weak and crumbly. I took my time, letting the flour fall gently into the bowl, a soft, white cascade. Or was it sugar? I squinted at the recipe, the tiny print blurring before my eyes. Baking required focus and attention to detail. And sometimes, in the excitement of the process, it was easy to get a little mixed up. I double-checked the instructions, my finger tracing the lines of text. Yes, it was definitely flour first. I breathed a sigh of relief and continued. Okay, flour it was. I added a pinch of salt, a small but essential addition. Salt, often overlooked, played a crucial role in enhancing the flavors and balancing the sweetness. Just a pinch, but it made all the difference. I sprinkled it over the flour, watching as the tiny crystals disappeared into the white powder. Or maybe it was a tablespoon? Oops, no worries. A little extra salt never hurt anyone. Baking was as much about intuition as it was about precision. Sometimes you had to trust your instincts and go with the flow. I laughed at my momentary confusion, knowing that these little mishaps were all part of the fun. Right? I gathered the rest of my ingredients, feeling like a culinary warrior ready for battle. Each ingredient was a weapon in my arsenal. Each step a strategic move in the game of baking. I felt a surge of confidence, a sense of purpose. This was my domain, my kitchen, and I was ready to create something delicious. The butter, softened to perfection, the eggs, fresh and ready to be cracked. The sugar, sweet and fine. Each one had its place, its moment to shine. I took a deep breath, savoring the anticipation. This was the beginning of something wonderful, a journey of flavors and textures, a dance of ingredients that would culminate in a masterpiece. I was ready. Let the baking begin. Next, the mixing bowl. It was time to tackle the next step in my baking adventure. I had already gathered all my ingredients, and now I needed the perfect vessel to mix them in. The mixing bowl was the heart of the operation, the place where all the magic would happen. I grabbed my biggest one. It looked huge. I had always prided myself on being prepared, and this bowl was no exception. It was the largest one I owned, a trusty companion in many baking endeavors. Its size had never failed me before, and I was confident it would be more than sufficient for my giant cookie dough. Surely it would be big enough for my giant cookie dough. I had made this recipe countless times, and each time, the dough seemed to grow larger and larger. But this bowl had always managed to contain it. I felt a sense of satisfaction as I began to add the ingredients, knowing that I was well prepared. I poured in all the ingredients. Flour, sugar, eggs, and all the other essentials went into the bowl. Each ingredient was carefully measured and added with precision. The bowl seemed to swallow them up, and I felt a sense of accomplishment as I watched the mixture come together. The dough was starting to take shape, and I could already imagine the delicious cookies that would soon be baking in the oven. And then I realized my mistake. As I continued to mix the ingredients, I noticed something alarming. The dough was expanding at an alarming rate. It was as if it had a life of its own, growing and rising with each passing second. My confidence began to waver, and a sense of dread started to creep in. The bowl was not big enough, not even close. Panic set in as I watched the dough spill over the edges of the bowl. It was a mess, and I knew I had underestimated the sheer volume of the dough. My once trusty bowl had failed me, and I was left scrambling to contain the overflow. The dough was rising like a volcano, threatening to erupt over the edges. It was a sight to behold, a baking disaster in the making. The dough seemed to have a mind of its own, and I was powerless to stop it. I frantically searched for another bowl, anything to contain the growing mass. But it was too late. The dough had already taken over, and I was left to deal with the aftermath. I scrambled to find another bowl, but the kitchen was already in disarray. Flour and ingredients were scattered everywhere, and the dough continued to rise. It was a chaotic scene, and I felt a sense of helplessness as I tried to regain control. The once orderly kitchen had turned into a disaster zone, and I was at the center of it all. I managed to transfer some of the dough to another bowl, but it was still overflowing. The new bowl was barely enough to contain the expanding dough, and I knew I was fighting a losing battle. The dough seemed to have a life of its own, and it was determined to escape any confines I tried to place it in. Exhausted but determined, I continued to battle the dough. I wasn't going to let it defeat me. I had come too far to give up now. With a renewed sense of purpose, I tackled the dough with all my might, determined to bring it under control. Finally, I managed to contain the dough. The kitchen was still a mess, but I had regained some semblance of control. The dough was no longer threatening to spill over, and I could breathe a sigh of relief. It had been a challenging ordeal, but I had come out victorious. With the dough finally under control, I placed it in the oven. The hard part was over, and now all I had to do was wait. As the oven door closed, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had faced a baking disaster and come out on top. As I cleaned up the kitchen, I reflected on the experience. It had been a challenging and messy ordeal, but it had also been a valuable lesson. I had learned the importance of being prepared and the need to adapt when things didn't go as planned. I watched the timer count down with anticipation. The cookies would soon be ready, and I couldn't wait to taste the fruits of my labor. Despite the chaos, I knew the end result would be worth it. Finally, the moment arrived. I took the cookies out of the oven, and they looked perfect. Golden brown and delicious, they were a testament to my perseverance. The kitchen may have been a mess, but the cookies were a triumph. I took a bite of a cookie, and it was everything I had hoped for. The taste was incredible, and I felt a sense of pride in what I had accomplished. Despite the challenges, I had succeeded in creating something wonderful. I shared the cookies with my family and friends, and their smiles made it all worthwhile. The experience had been a roller coaster, but in the end, it was a success. The shrinking bowl had been a challenge, but it had also been an opportunity to learn and grow. As I looked at the empty mixing bowl, I couldn't help but smile. It had been a wild ride, but I had come out stronger on the other side. The shrinking bowl had taught me a valuable lesson, and I was grateful for the experience. I put the mixing bowl away, knowing that I would be better prepared next time. The kitchen was clean, the cookies were delicious, and I had learned an important lesson. The case of the shrinking bowl was closed, but the memories would last a lifetime. With a cup of tea and a plate of cookies, I sat down to enjoy the fruits of my labor. The journey had been challenging, but the end result was worth it. The shrinking bowl had been a test, but I had passed with flying colors. And as I savored each bite, I knew that I was ready for whatever baking adventure came next. I grabbed a wooden spoon. It was tiny compared to the mountain of dough, but I was determined. I stirred and stirred. The dough was thick and heavy. My arm muscles burned. I added more chocolate chips. Because why not? Chocolate makes everything better, right? I popped the giant cookie in the oven, and then, well, I completely forgot about it. Got caught up watching my favorite cooking show, you know how it goes. I dreamed of elaborate cakes and perfectly frosted cupcakes. Time flew by. The smell of burning cookies? What smell? Suddenly, I remembered my cookie. I raced to the oven. Smoke billowed out. My beautiful giant cookie? It was a disaster. It was burnt to a crisp. Flour dusted the kitchen floor. My dream of a legendary cookie? Up in smoke. But wait, I took a deep breath. Don't panic, Rachel. There's always a solution. I grabbed a spoon and chipped away at the burnt parts. Okay, so it wasn't a giant cookie anymore. More like giant cookie crumbs. But they still smelled like chocolate. And that's what counts, right? I grabbed my biggest ice cream scoop. I piled high the cookie crumbs. I drizzled on some melted chocolate. And then, because life is too short to be anything but extra, I added a sprinkle of sea salt. Voila, giant cookie crumb sundaes. So my giant cookie was a giant fail. But you know what? It was hilarious. And the sundaes, they were actually amazing. Sometimes the biggest kitchen disasters lead to the most delicious creations. Cooking isn't about perfection. It's about having fun. It's about experimenting. It's about embracing the chaos and laughing at your mistakes. So go ahead, get messy in the kitchen, try new things, and don't be afraid to fail. Because even a giant cookie disaster can be a delicious adventure. And trust me, those cookie crumb sundaes, totally worth the chaos.